what you just witnessed was an unfortunate result of a loss of patriotism and moral fealty to the homeland. Indeed, you saw a bunch of representatives who were elected to ensure that America's Constitution and the will of the American people within the context of the Constitution is fulfilled, not the will of powers and special interests who seek to prop up foreign nations. And yet that is exactly what is manifesting in American politics right now. For those of you who are unacquainted, Speaker Mike Johnson helped pass a major bill that includes 4 parts to the bill, including aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel. It also includes humanitarian aid to Gaza, and it also includes banning a TikTok all in one. Now, there are many logistical problems with all of that, and there are many inherent contradictions in such a proposal. But I'm not here to analyze the quality of legislation. I'm rather here to talk about what this particular moment means for all of us who love America, and what going forward we can do to actually right the tide towards a pro-America policy. So Mike Johnson passes this bill, and people in the House of Representatives floor have Ukraine flags and they wave them. And there are many arguments you can make against this bill or foreign aid in general, particularly foreign aid to Ukraine. You could essentially say, one of the arguments you could say is that sending more money to Ukraine will simply be done on the false pretenses that we were dragged into when we first gave money to Ukraine, which were revealed by the intelligence leaks that happened last year, where we saw military officials and intelligence officials in America basically saying they understood that the aid that we were giving to Ukraine would actually not help move forward the efforts of the Ukrainians. The so-called Spring Offensive, which was one of the justifications for giving aid to Ukraine back in 2023, didn't really go forward, and it didn't really have the effect it was supposed to have, because a lot of the soldiers in the Spring Offensive were undertrained, despite the fact that the public was told the money would train the soldiers. So you could say that. You could say that the Ukraine foreign aid spending is an example of the sunk cost fallacy, where you just put so much money into something and you think at this point, well, I'm already putting money into it, so why not continue to put money into it? Well, the problem is you suffer a massive opportunity cost, which reduces your power in other areas. You can make the argument that we are actually making the lives of the Ukrainians worse by doing this. You can make so many different arguments. My arguments are going to focus on 2 principles: the meaning of American patriotism in this age, and also the preservation of a moral obligation between the politicians and the citizenry that our Republican system 100% demands. Indeed, my friends, when I oftentimes talk about these issues, I will always say that I take an America first perspective. And this elicits a knee-jerk reaction in the minds of many political observers. They say, well, you're America first? Does that mean you're an isolationist? Does that mean you want to let the whole world burn? Does that mean you want the innocent Ukrainians to die? Does that mean you want the innocent Gazans to die? Well, no, not at all. Being America first does not imply that I hate anybody. Being America first implies that I believe that my country, when it comes to the political decisions made by leaders in my country, should be the primary consideration of those leaders, not the well-being of another country. It's interesting. When I say that I'm America first, people will oftentimes try to say that means I'm against something, being for something, being against something. But in absence of a positive is not a negative. I can say I support America without hating Ukraine or hating anyone else. But it is because our political conversation has become so muddled, so tainted by emotion and proximity and association, that rational conversation has left the room a long time ago. And so America First should not be a political slogan. America First should be a affection, a symbol of affection that we all have for our country, and the necessity of putting our country primary when we make policy decisions about our country. And this leads me to my first point, my friends. American patriotism in this age has been largely forgotten by those who believe that America's fate is the fate of the whole world. Congressman Gerald Connolly said very oddly, when it comes to this topic, that the Ukraine-Russia border is our border. Go.
Some say, well, we have to deal with our border first. The Ukrainian-Russian border is our border. It's the border between depraved autocracy and freedom-loving people seeking our democratic way of life. Do we have a stake in that outcome? Yes.
Now, what Congressman Connolly was getting at, because if you take his word at face value, it's absolutely absurd. But what he was getting at is that because America is invested in Ukraine, it is therefore our business, and we have to fulfill the compact we made. It should also be noted that Connolly deployed a deceptive use of language to try to muddy the waters of this particular issue. He said freedom-loving peoples, and we have an obligation to help freedom-loving peoples. Well, what this idea implies, really, is that America has an obligation to spread its ideas around the world, which oftentimes comes with the territory of infringing upon a nation's sovereignty to place our version of what we believe they should be like in the world. Now, we understand this path is leading with destruction, death, and actually creates societies that are inimical towards the idea of freedom, because they believe that freedom involves guns and destroying their culture, as opposed to what it really should mean, which is an unlocking of the human flourishing of the individual. But besides that, it also implies that every country that pays lip service to Americanism is like America. And that's not the case. Look at Ukraine. Ukraine is a country where the president is quite literally able to suspend opposition parties in the name of them being allegedly controlled by Vladimir Putin. And even if that is the case, you should still have different perspectives open up in the public square. It is Ukraine has the ability legally to shut down opposition media, which they did, because they have shut down media that goes against the narratives of the Zelensky government. Ukraine probably, allegedly, had a role in the death of a very prominent journalist, Gonzalo Lira, who was reporting against their narrative as well. So when you say freedom-loving and they're like America, you should actually show me the similarities. There is no similarity based in the concrete actions of the nations. There is only a similarity created in the abstract realm of rhetoric that benefits the goals of a particular geopolitical interest, which is antithetical towards American national sovereignty. So not only are Connolly's words, I think, rather philosophically dead, not only are they faulty, but they presume a worldview that has gotten America into a lot of trouble and has degraded our standing on the world stage. Just because someone professes to have your values does not mean you are bound to help them. You can only help people who you have a solid, morally founded connection with. That is the beginning of moral obligation, and we'll talk about that in a second here. Well, first I must say, Ukraine is not an ally. Ukraine has never been an ally. Ukraine has been a liability for NATO for very long, which is one of the reasons why Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, never admitted Ukraine into NATO. There's reasons why Zelensky, before the war even started, came to Washington, D.C. in the summers of the 2020s, 2021, 2022, and begged Biden to be let into NATO, and Biden basically didn't even entertain it, because he understood the issues that Ukraine has had. There's a reasons why there was bipartisan anguish over foreign aid we were giving to Ukraine years ago, when it was discovered that there were actual Nazis within the power structure of Ukraine. There's reasons. Ukraine is not an ally. Ukraine is a useful asset for the intelligence community to drive a geopolitical wedge between Vladimir Putin and the rest of Europe. It sounds crude for me to say that. It sounds rude for me to say that. It may even make some of you grimace and revulse, but if the truth makes you revulse, then may the truth continue to hit you in your face, because that is the only thing that will actually help you understand the reality that's going on right now. But let me assume that Ukraine is an ally. Just because you have a connection with somebody does not mean you need to continue that connection at any means necessary. If a country involves itself on another country on illegitimate grounds, that does not create a moral obligation for that country to persist in that behavior. In fact, the opposite is true. If I could demonstrate that America involved itself in Ukraine on illegitimate grounds to bolster NATO authority in that region and to push back Vladimir Putin, which benefits us, well, rather benefits the geopolitical order of NATO, while not really benefiting the American people in any tangible way, then I can demonstrate to you that America has no obligation to continue that bad line of behavior. You don't correct bad behavior by continuing bad behavior. And bad behavior can't create a moral obligation because bad behavior is the antithesis of moral obligation. But let us assume that bad behavior creates an obligation to our allies, as I hear so often said by people, to justify spending American dollars on foreign nations. Well, if that's the case, then you have to really show me the connection between the subject of our bad behavior and the well-being of the American people. If I could demonstrate to you that our bad behavior helps our allies but hurts Americans, then under any framework of obligation, politicians must cease that behavior. If I can show you that by sanctioning Russia and by shutting down the global economy and spending billions on Ukraine, Americans have faced disrupted supply chains, we have faced higher gas prices, higher inflation prices, then under any framework, even the framework that says helping our allies helps Americans, you must discontinue that behavior because it clearly does not help anybody and it makes things worse. And that's precisely what happened for the first 2 years of the conflict. But so many people are captured by these magical words. We have to stand by our allies. Or they think in terms of hashtags. We have to stand by Ukraine, as opposed to thinking in terms of national self-interest, which has to be the guiding principle of any geopolitical, national political political policy pursuit. But this goes back to patriotism. Because ultimately, I believe that a country that is not guided, people in a country that are not guided by an affection for their country, an affection for the ideas of their country, an affection for the traditions of their country, and a desire to keep those things intact, will be guided by different kinds of affections. This is what I call the citizen of the world syndrome, the sort of cosmopolitan syndrome that says that we all exist in an internationalist world where we're all interconnected and all boundaries and our borders are unnecessary and they are sort of superficial to the fact that we're all connected. Well, this is a very nice idea in a sort of abstract fantasy way. But when it comes to brass tacks and practical reality, this idea is absolutely murderous because countries do exist, because countries are limited and they do have certain needs that need to be met. And in order to meet those needs, you need to have as many resources and as much focus as possible on those needs. And whenever the attention of government is split between two different domains, the duty of political science in that particular situation is to decide how many resources goes to what issue. For every dollar we spend on Ukraine is a dollar missed on addressing the migrant crisis. For every dollar we spend on Ukraine, the dollar missed addressing the immigration crisis. For every dollar we spent on Ukraine, the dollar missed addressing sort of the squatters crisis. For every dollar we spend on Ukraine is a dollar missed addressing our crumbling national security power grid infrastructure. For every dollar we spend on something else is a dollar missed on other things. But going back to the love of the country, a love of country will already have this in consideration. Because the love of country is focused on strengthening the country and strengthening the homeland by looking at it in a rational way. Affectation is not merely an emotion. Affectation begins with an emotion, but it ends in a process that betters what you care about. Because love is simply looking at someone, investing them, and taking them up from the worst place they are, or loving them in the high place and making them become better and better and better. But when you have a country of people who are convinced that they have to get involved in other people's conflicts just because that's how things are, you have a country that has forgotten what patriotism actually means. Let's look at the example of Mike Johnson, for example. Mike Johnson used to be someone who was very America first. He used to be someone who was very much against foreign entanglements. He used to be someone that was very much against appropriating resources over to other countries for the heck of it. And yet, after he became Speaker, Joe Biden and several other House Republicans who were on the Intel Committee in Congress dragged him into the White House, along with Mike Pompeo, the former director of the CIA, who famously bragged about lying, cheating, and stealing in the course of his duties at the CIA. People tend to forget that.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
They dragged him into a room and they presented to him their narrative about Ukraine. And then Mike Johnson comes out and says, well, I rather would send bullets to Ukraine than servicemen to Ukraine. That's not an argument. That's an emotional sentiment, a rhetorical device that has no grounding in anything except the desires and special interests of those who are interested in war. And yet on that basis, Americans are devoting their money towards foreign nations. It is a faulty basis. It is a basis that does not consider national self-interest. And fundamentally, it is a basis that is dictated by people who speak in terms of power and speak in terms of influence and don't speak in terms of principle. On principle, this foreign aid package can't be justified. On principle, America's obsession with Ukraine cannot be justified. On principle, it is destructive to the needs of the homeland. But in general, foreign aid is itself unpatriotic. Foreign aid is unpatriotic because it drains the resources of the country for another, and then creates, as I mentioned, a superficial geopolitical connection to another country, an entangling alliance, so to speak. And then, without any justification beyond that particular issue, it reinforces that alliance through ad hoc ways. So, for example, you give foreign aid to a country and you say that they're an ally, and then all of a sudden that country gets into a fight. Well, you have to get into the fight as well. Even if getting into the fight may hurt people of your own country, because the justification will simply be, well, they're an ally. Well, guess what? Not all alliances serve the good of the nation. And if something does not serve the good of the nation in terms of foreign policy, then it cannot absolutely be pursued without tending to the destruction of the nation. Because if it does not serve the good of the nation, it must serve the opposite. But again, all of this, what I'm saying, matters not to those who think in terms of alliances and power and dominance on the world stage, sort of political realism as they call it. It will only reach those who think in terms of piety and fealty to their country in the most broadest sense possible. And we're missing that in this nation. A rational love of country will tend towards the good of the country. But a love of another country will tend towards their good, even at the expense of our nation. I find it dismaying that we are at this point in our history. I find it dismaying that we are at this point as Americans. But it is my hope that by rediscovering genuine national self-interest and by rediscovering the necessity of maintaining a strong nation that is buttressed by patriots and whose resources are directed towards things that benefit it, we can have a better country and a better America. And it need not be isolationist. Because this idea of isolationism basically says that if I care about my country, I don't only hate other countries, but I exclude them from consideration. And yet, this is a slur. Because real isolationism is simply putting your head in the sand and thinking about no one else but yourself. I think that America needs diplomatic relationships with other countries around the world. I think that America absolutely needs to have a sort of strong diplomatic presence in many countries around the world. But diplomacy and active military engagement and active financial commitments are three separate categories. And if we mix them and we treat them all as the same, we tend to make bad policies. And those bad policies make all of us, both in the world and in our country, worse off. My friends, like, comment, share, subscribe, do whatever you can. Let's get our message out there. If you want to help support me, if you enjoy philosophical commentary on politics and social issues, you can donate to me as well in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.